Welcome everybody to the webinar. Really glad to be presenting to all of you today. So let me go through what the discussion points are going to be for today and what is the agenda for today. So we are going to, of course, first touch upon, this entire uncertain market landscape, what's going on, the macroeconomic situations, the uncertainty in the market doesn't seem to end as we think about the last 2 years and continuing into 2024. So that's something that we'll touch upon quickly. The next thing that we'll touch upon is, as we think about all of the wins in the market from a service provider standpoint in the IT industry, what is the role that strategic assets play, particularly in accelerating deal situations? So, assets as such has been very commonly used from a service delivery standpoint, from accelerating the way in which the actual outcomes are delivered. But it has been the use of these assets has been limited when it comes to the actual operations of a service provider, the engagement with clients, and so on and so forth. And that's something that is the focus of today's conversation. There are also some very interesting assets that Everest Group has created internally, which we believe could be very valuable for some of our clients. And that's something that we'd want to touch upon, deep dive in, show you some of the assets that we have worked upon and how they could be used by different service providers as well as enterprises to be able to really address some of the key issues that they face when it comes to entire large-scale digital transformation engagements. So those are going to be the key discussion points before we close today's sessions with Q&A. We've got some very interesting questions as part of registration, which we'll be taking towards the end and probably some during the conversation itself. Feel free to share your questions as we go. And we'd love to pick them up either during the sessions or we'll reach out to you after the session as well. Now, in terms of what are the key messages, what is it that you will take back after this session, at the end of this session? So there are four main things. A, as I said, the macroeconomic uncertainties continue to loom. The market, therefore, demands more. The enterprises expect a lot more investment, a lot more effort from service providers. And in accordance to that, there is meaningful effort that service providers are making to be able to keep the leaders engaged, show values, to continue creating pipeline or investing in talent or any other account management activities, be it through massive reorganizations to align better with enterprise demands, or be it through leadership changes, more effort in strengthening relationships, partnerships, investments in COEs, labs, everything service providers are doing. But is that still enough? The second message is, as we think about the entire sales process, if service providers are still following the traditional way of engagement with clients, which is relying on rainmaker sales individuals, only relationship-based engagements, you're possibly missing out on a big opportunity out there. The slow discovery and generic claims typically erode margins for service providers and invites competition. So that's a very big issue that we have heard commonly from a lot of our clients, and that's something we'd like to touch upon. And in this current intense competition, it's important to move at a very fast pace. So that's the second one, that how do you need to relook at your sales process and possibly append it with strategic assets. That's where the third point, the solution, comes into picture. That when we think about some of the leading service providers who are winning large-scale engagements, who are shaping them in a sole-sourced manner, they're driving a lot of industrializing a lot of their strategic assets, which are data-driven, credible information, credible data behind it, something that accelerates the manual discovery process. That's being adopted intensively. And the way forward is to adopt these assets to enable a fundamental shift in the way you engage with clients from the beginning itself. So those are the key messages that we'd like to share today, and we'll go into each of them in detail. But before that, let me invite Yugal to talk about the health of the IT services industry, what's currently happening, and what's expected in near future.
Hey, thank you, Alicia. Thank you very much. And if you You know, I don't really like this page, and the reason is from a almost a 12% of industry, we are at 2%. But without belaboring the point, I think all of us know that the industry is going through its own struggle for a variety of reasons. But that's where the point Alicia made becomes so important, that the the same old things of doing engaging with clients from a provider perspective isn't going to work. And I think what we have seen and what history has told us of services industry, that whenever there have been challenging times, the the provider landscape has disrupted. You go to the 2 decades back when offshoring really started scaling up, or then the global financial crisis, or then when cloud computing became scaled, or then the pandemic time. So this time also, we do believe that providers who are going to focus a lot on how do they engage clients in a different way, and one big part of it is the strategic assets. They are going to succeed, and this growth trajectory will not represent those service providers, but it may represent the broader industry, because we do believe that not every provider is going to pivot to that strategic asset type of role, and we have already started to see that change already shaping the industry. If you move on, you know, one of the things that we have seen in the industry is that the uncertainty is so high, and the uncertainty is sometimes good and sometimes bad. I think we were very surprised to see, specifically in the European region, when people started to talk about green shoots, and then tariffs happened. So variety of things are happening at the same time, and of course the geopolitical scenario continues to be challenging. When we work with our buy side client, I think, in fact, provider as well, they are frankly less concerned about macro challenges as much they are concerned about the uncertainty, because this uncertainty is not allowing them to invest. And that's where we are seeing the deal cycles have become longer, which again goes back to the point Alicia made. So how do you accelerate that deal cycle? And one of the key ingredient of it is all the strategic assets, that some of them we are going to talk about in this session as well. But maybe we will ask Alicia, our own audience, to talk about this uncertainty a bit.
Yes, let's ask a quick poll from the audience in terms of what do they see as a key reason for this enterprise uncertainty about investing in technology transformation initiatives. As per your experience, have you seen, broader global uncertain environment, the macroeconomic challenges, geopolitical issues, those to be the key issue? Have you also heard of unclear ROI to be a key hindrance? Or is it just suddenly imposed tariffs over the past few months becoming a key issue? Or is it internal budget constraint or lack of clarity on technology changes? What really do you see is the issue when it comes to enterprises' willingness to invest in large scale technology transformation initiatives? We'll wait for a couple of seconds and we have the results. It's quite interesting that the results are not so much on global uncertainty, but unclear ROI, budget constraints, lack of clarity on technology changes. So if we think about, some of them, unclear ROI, budget constraint, lack of clarity on technology changes, these are more internal factors. Internal to the sense these are not factors that are absolutely out of control when it comes to service providers or when it comes to the enterprises themselves who have to invest. So Ankit, turning over to you, what do you feel about this response? What is your observation? You've been speaking to a lot of enterprise leaders lately. What do you hear them talk about that's holding them back? And if you want to specifically comment on some of these issues that got highlighted as part of the poll here itself.
Sure. Thanks, Alicia. And I think the poll results really coincide with what we have been hearing in the market. So if I just take poll into consideration, more than 50% of the participants really responded across two major buckets, which is the ROI concern and budget constraints, right? Both of them are largely interdependent if you think about it, because if you have a clear case with ROI defined right at the onset and throughout the journey, probably it will improve enterprise confidence and they would be willing to invest. If I were to juxtapose with the data that we have from the market interactions, 40% of the enterprises have highlighted budget overruns and lack of clear ROI from their transformational initiatives as one of the key inhibitors where they are not able to commit to the next wave of transformation, right? We saw that in majority of the phase from 2018 to 2022, 2023 around the cloud transformation that was going on. Many investments were made, but only few really met the end goal or the end objectives that they were aligned to. So that is what was also inhibiting and getting translated into the limited budgets that are being sanctioned as of now, because the lack of ROI clarity is not just at the onset of the engagement, but throughout the deal cycle as well. So that's how I look at it. Now, the two parts of where it is being observed around this lack of clear ROI would be the value articulation from the service provider themselves, because one, they, yes, enterprises know the baseline that they are operating with, but you cannot transition them to a north state directly. There has to be a staged way in which everything works out, and that narrative has to be built out. Second, the non-tech capability aspects. So technology alone cannot do much, and that's where a lot of the people, processes, aspects really kick in. We are witnessing some of the shifts happening across the service providers to communicate something to enterprises around those lines, but that has to be a lot more pronounced going forward. And you really need to think about the broader shifts in the operating model, not just for yourselves, but for the enterprises, and handhold them towards this change. So that essentially provides us the segue to talk about the core theme in discussion and the assets that we would want to talk about. Alicia, handing it over to you.
Absolutely. So you're right, Ankit. I think, it's ultimately things that service providers can help enterprises with to address those challenges. So we've talked about, the broader economic situation in the market. We've talked about the problem, which is really about the budget constrained ROI. Because of the broader economic issues, the enterprises themselves are stretched and stressed. So what is it that service providers can do to help them accelerate some of the investment, to help handhold them in this journey? And that's where our next section of the discussion comes into picture, which is about strategic assets and their role that they play when it comes to accelerating deals. So, Parul, let me turn to you. Why don't you first talk about what is the typical journey when we think about the entire sales cycle from discovery to the actual value realization for an enterprise, or value commitment for a service provider? What does it look like, and where are the main issues that enterprises face when it comes to this clear articulation of value or understanding of what they can do within the limited budget?
Yes. Thanks, Alicia. So I think this sets the stage for understanding the current challenges in the traditional deal life cycle, right? And we heard from the audience that the main challenges that they are seeing from the enterprises side is on the budgets part, the unclear ROI. And what we notice is that the traditional deal life cycle that most of the service providers are following at this point of time, it does not help pacify some of those challenges, right? In fact, in a traditional deal life cycle, some of those challenges are even more pronounced, right? So if you take a look at this slide, the blue line that you see, it shows the complete life cycle, but it is hindered by these orange momentum killers for most of the service providers. If I talk about the first stage, wherein you discover what is the opportunity, right? So, this traditional approach involves weeks of interviews, endless workshops, and digging for information. And it has three main issues. Firstly, it is unstructured, right? Secondly, because it's unstructured, there is a lot of pursuit costs involved. And finally, the most important one is that since it is unstructured, you miss out on many real qualified needs, right? The goal of this opportunity discovery is typically to get on the buyer's radar and establish yourself as a thought leader and credible visionary. But this process of following the endless workshops, taking a lot of time, does the opposite, right? It's a very slow process. If you move to the next stage of value design and business case, now because your first stage was very anecdotal, right? Your value story is also unquantified. You make generic claims like we can improve your efficiency, but you do not have a very strong data backing it. And since the client is also facing budget scrutiny, they rightfully push back and demand hard ROI proof. And this is a major stalling point. And that's why in the third stage, wherein you need to differentiate yourself and position yourself as somebody who can provide clear ROI to the client, you're not able to differentiate yourself from the peers because all of the service providers and all your peers have a similar story. And finally, in the fourth stage, wherein we talk about the proposal and sourcing part, the whole result of this process, the first three stages, that there's a very slow path to sole source deals. And more often than not, it's mostly about a competitive RFP wherein you invite competitors, you commoditize your offering, and then you are forced to compete on price. And again, it destroys your margins. So essentially, if we talk about the current process that most of the service providers are seeing, Alicia, it's a very long drawn, painful process, and they're not able to establish themselves as a credible visionary, a thought leader, which can help enterprises achieve that ROI that they have imagined in the beginning.
Absolutely. And these are quite, big issues that we keep hearing about from our service provider clients as well. So, Ankit, what do you see service providers currently doing to address these challenges? What are some of the top few investments that they've been making in this space?
Yeah. So, Alicia, some of the high service providers, what they're trying to do is realign their operating model to start off, right? They want to ensure that they are a lot more industry aligned in the ways of operations. The contextual knowledge comes to the fore with solution tribes, OKRs being committed, which is a lot more focused on some of the niche areas that would be working with the enterprise together, right? It's not necessarily at a broad-based level. The overall cadence is becoming a lot more agile from the discovery to proposal kind of a life cycle, if I were to say, is cutting down to weeks and not months. So how efficiently you can understand the enterprise context, how easily you can really give it or show it back to them, and a lot more early in this deal cycle, that becomes really, really important. The core of the discussion today and the following pages that we would be walking through would be around assets and IP investments, because how you can really monetize the repeatable knowledge that you have and the tribal knowledge, that becomes all the more important. It is also a function of how the delivery models are changing, which are becoming a lot more asset led, which are becoming a lot more IP led, which essentially means service providers are also thinking about non-linear ways of revenue, not necessarily having the people contributing to enough. And more importantly, it is also the need of the hour, because we are now looking at AI as an enabler, not just in terms of doing the development work, QA, and so on and so forth, but also talking about the self-service diagnostics, which is literally left in the entire cycle of understanding the enterprise context and enabling some of those insights for the sales team. Readiness benchmarks, which is one of the critical element, because every enterprise that you interact with want to know what others are doing, where are they in their journey, and so on and so forth. They need to benchmark themselves and then understand what the next looks like for them in their context, rather than becoming the Netflix of the world, in probably which is not aligned to their industry. So that peer data, that view becomes really, really important. And then eventually, how you make what do you make of the quick wins, and sort of scale your investment in certain specific scenarios versus really spreading out too thin. So those kind of decisions are to be made, and that's where IP assets and IP investments are being made. The last one, the commercial innovation and GTM differentiation. If I were to summarize, it is happening across two ways. One, the model of engagement is changing. The outcome and risk sharing ways of operations are becoming critical. And the third point, which is around account-based marketing campaigns, I think if you overlay that with the outcome risk sharing pricing constructs, you need to understand the enterprise context, and then only you can commit to some of these stuff. And that's where the closeness to the client would be very, very important. The second one is the partnerships, right? So the technology vendors are becoming very important. The hyperscalers, Fuse, GTM, and the ISVs, which are now spinning off in different arenas. If you think about SDLC or otherwise, how are you enabling them to get to the enterprise context, and how are you using them in your own ways of operations becomes critical. So a partnership and an enterprise context are the two ways in which the real differentiation is emerging across the commercial and GTM for the service providers. Alicia, I think we should be moving for or rather having a deep dive around the assets and IP investments from here on.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And on that, let me ask this question from Yugal. Yugal, over the last so many years as Everest Group, we've been helping our service provider clients in being more successful and helping them solve their issues. On this particular aspect, of course, there is a lot of support we provide in terms of operating model changes or in terms of engaging from a commercial innovation, but specifically on assets and IP. What kind of investments at a high level, if you could touch upon, what are some of the key investments that Everest Group is making, and how are we helping our service providers in this journey?
Yeah, so if you move to the next page, maybe I'll just comment on that page. Go ahead a bit. One more, please. Now, what we have seen and done, historically, we have found that the so-called assets that service providers, tech or consulting teams have brought to the clients, without sugarcoating what were meaningless. Many of them call their Excel sheet as asset. Many of them call a lot of things as assets. And as we work on the buy side, we realize that the clients want something deeper, and they want somebody like us to jump into the ring and build some of these assets. And we ended up dividing this entire landscape into two broad themes. One is what we call engines that can create diagnosis. So they can assess where the clients are as of today. What is their North Star? And by the way, that North Star keeps changing. What is their North Star for next 3 years? And what is that journey? So that diagnostic engine becomes one type of asset where we have invested and helped both our buy and supply side clients. I must say the tech consulting firms and somebody like a Big Four have been a lot more forthcoming in using these than the traditional system integrators. And they are using it to, of course, quantify value. And see, only that service provider will be asked to quantify value where the client believes the service provider is bringing value. But many service providers are order takers, and they do what the clients want them to do. So they do not really get into that. And many somehow have this poor perception of themselves that they should not build these assets because they do not have permission to play, which I think is a very dangerous thinking, and which is hurting the growth of many of these service providers. So one side is you have these diagnostic engines where we have invested, and I think all three of you are going to talk about these. So two specifically, one is we are doing good amount of work on product-led operating model, and Parul is going to talk about it. We have AI maturity assessment toolkit we are building. Alicia is going to talk about it. And then there is one more asset that we have invested in, which are sort of enablers, which provide both enterprises and service provider to assess. Okay, if I have to do some kind of prioritization, for example, AI is changing so many things within technology, and the CTOs and the CIOs, both on the buy and supply side, they cannot change everything. So they want to create an investment prioritization framework that we need to have something. Unfortunately, their service provider partners have not been able to come up with that, so we had to make one. But what we have seen helping is, A, it has reduced some of the friction. Otherwise, what used to happen is uh, enterprises would take so much time just to decide these things, so much time just to prioritize, because they did not have much view on how should they go methodically about it. So the friction is reduced. It is still there, but I think it is reduced. Secondly, the can be repeatable. So I know during the pre-registration there was a question around how do you have standardization and customization both at the same time. And we have seen a good blend of that combination. You need to have some kind of standardization, and then we need to build some kind of customization on top of that specific line to drive profitability for the service providers, but at the same time create the value that the enterprise is looking for. So maybe with that, I'll ask Parul to just take us through some of the excellent work that she and her team have done on the product-led operating model part. Parul?
Sure, Yugal. If we move to the next slide, so let me quickly talk about firstly how this toolkit came to be in existence. So the genesis around it. So we recently completed a project with a large global system integrator. And their large deals team was facing a common but very critical challenge that their enterprise customers want to take massive transformations, specifically around product led operating model. But the service provider found it incredibly difficult to understand what is the current maturity of the enterprise. Secondly, understand which are the initiatives that they need to prioritize so that they get the immediate ROI and they are clear about, okay, this is the direction that they need to take. And finally, the most important one is to quantify the potential outcomes. And the key challenge was that this whole transformation, and typically that's how it happens, it's not only about technology, right? It's also about people, processes, the organization culture, so on and so forth. And that is why it was becoming very difficult for their sales leaders to effectively articulate this and drive these complex consultative conversations. And this is where this toolkit came into being, right? It helped them to have a data driven approach, right? It accelerated the complete discovery phase from, say, months to, in fact, I would say in a few hours, right? Because this is such a great tool that with few questions, you are able to effectively pinpoint what is the correct maturity, what are the gap areas, and what are the recommendations. So, through this whole data driven gap analysis, this complete process was accelerated. And I would also want to quickly talk about how we went about it. So, if we move to the next slide, this whole process, like I said, was not only about technology, but there were multiple levers to it. And in this framework, we talked about four key dimensions. What is the organizational design? What are the current tool and technologies and how they need to evolve them? What are the current processes and methodologies in terms of agile adoption, current governance frameworks, change management, etc. And finally, what is the talent and culture? And through these four dimensions, we took the input of certain stakeholders in the enterprise through a set of questions which were on a spectrum. And through that, we plotted the current enterprise maturity in terms of four stages. So whether it is basic, that means that it has a classical structure, tower-based IT, which is not conducive to product-led operating model, or is it typical, advanced, or currently best in class? So this is a lot of data, but when you need to have conversations with executives, you need to have a very visual approach to it so that the message is clear once you see it in 2 or 3 seconds, right? So that's where the whole visual representation part come in. So if we move to the next slide, we see that we plotted the enterprise on two dimensions. What are their current capabilities and what are the outcomes that they have been able to achieve? So in this 2 by 2, the blue dots that you see is the whole data driven foundation that we have built in the background of the toolkit. So we took input from more than 200 enterprises, large enterprises with revenue, say more than 5 billion, and plotted their maturity on product-led operating model. And the orange dot that you see is the focus company, the client to which the service provider is taking this toolkit. And herein you can clearly see that the enterprise, what is the current maturity of it? And based on it, we identified the gaps on the 4 dimensions that I talked about earlier, and also clear recommendations, prioritized recommendations on all 4 dimensions. So this made the complete discovery process very tangible and very quick for the service provider, right? And again, there are multiple parts to this visualization, which we will also capture in the next slide, wherein we talk about what is the current gap in all those 4 dimensions. So it's not only about giving a very broad picture, but it goes into details in the different dimensions that, okay, if you see the orange line, so this is the client that has taken this assessment. So in process and methodologies, the client is doing really well. But when it comes to say tools and technologies, talent and culture, organizational design, it has some gaps to cover. So this toolkit was very well received, and I think this is one of the good assets that we have created. Alicia, I would now invite you to talk about the next AI maturity assessment that we created.
Yeah, absolutely. And whether we are talking about a product operating model or whether we are talking about any other large scale transformation organizations are undertaking, the genesis remains the same. Ultimately, what we are trying to solve for is two broad things. A, how do you accelerate the discovery process? How do you make sure you get to the gap identification of where the opportunities could be in a very, very rapid manner? The second is establishing yourself as a thought leadership and a thought partner for the enterprise, that we are not just here to give you the solution of the problem you solve the problem you have asked for, but to help you understand the broader nuances of where are the other challenges that you need to think about to be able to solve this problem holistically. And on the same lines, this is another use case for a similar kind of model that we have built, which is on enterprise AI maturity. Again, I don't have to talk about how significant AI adoption is for enterprises these days, but one of the key issues that most of them face is really around, we don't know where to start, we don't know what areas to invest in. Should we be investing in talent? Should we be investing in the foundational frameworks first? Should we be rethinking about the data and AI technology space, or should we be investing in the data foundation to begin with? Where do we start? Where are we lagging behind? Where are we lagging behind, which needs immediate attention? And then what should that roadmap look like? That's exactly the problem that we are trying to solve for with this similar kind of a toolkit focused on AI maturity. So the product operating model for AI was, in a way, a subset of the overall AI maturity. When we're thinking about AI maturity diagnostic, we are touching upon a lot of other different aspects as well for an enterprise to be able to embark on an AI journey. Essentially, what it helps to do is rapidly assess the maturity of the organization, where it is across 7 to 8 different dimensions. Where are the gaps maximum which needs to be filled in on priority? And of course, by doing all of this and not just providing a very tactical solution, it is elevating the differentiation, it's elevating the positioning in the mind of the enterprise clients as well. Overall, this is leading service providers to focus on very specific, credible insights as compared to generic suggestions that they can provide on best in class. But it's really about, hey, this is where you are and these are the gaps, and this is what you need to do to be able to reach that best in class capability. Instantly quantifying where the maturity gap is maximum, clearly articulating what are the improvement areas, and thereby positioning themselves as trusted, differentiated advisors to the clients. On the next slide, we quickly show you the actual framework that we have used. As I said, it's not just about the technology part, but it's really about overall vision. Is it aligned to how the industry is really moving? Is it aligned to the best in class in your industry or in the broader, beyond your immediate industry as well? How do you need to rethink about your culture and organization structure as you think about AI changing the way you work and the way you operate? The cost and investment, are you investing, and is your ROI case aligned to what some of the others are focusing on? Or are you targeting something which is much lower than what others are already achieving? Governance and ethics, that becomes a very important aspect when we think about the entire AI investment. And then talent, innovation, data, AI, all of these aspects are the inputs that can be gathered again in a very quick, short questionnaire format from enterprises, and then overlaying that on the strong foundation of data backed framework that has been created, the entire model that has been created, to get a very clear view based upon that third party's credible information on where are the gaps, what is it that you need to be doing, where should you be investing in. So that is the second product that we wanted to talk about. And yeah, the next one I would invite Ankit to talk about. So these two that we just talked about are more from an enterprise standpoint in terms of what service providers can take to enterprises to be able to accelerate their own discovery cycle with them. The next one is more about an internal prioritization. It could be used for an enterprise as well as internally. Ankit, why don't you talk about it?
Sure. Thanks, Lisha. And as you rightly said, this is an asset investment prioritization toolkit applicable for both enterprises and service providers. As service providers have also stepped up the game of building some of these assets, which are not just accelerators used in smaller ways, but broader IPs and assets which they are going ahead with in the market with. So I'll just layer in one of the examples of the engagement that we did, wherein we supported a CIO organization to help them understand the entire process of building an asset. So it starts off with the business case, right, where we define the value that you are really chasing and you are really after. And it is not just the revenue and cost, but also how can you better quantify some of the experience, sustainability, and market positioning related dynamics, which also play an important role when you make a decision with regards to any asset or an investment. So across the value chain, what we did was identified the value which is being coined or tagged to a particular product in terms of business case beyond the revenue and cost factors. Second, how it is being built, the cost or the input factors. What should be your team size, shoring? How should you build it? Whether it is better to build by or sort of augment with the existing capabilities, and then eventually with the resources on ground, how can you make it in a most productive fashion, right? The better part to understand in terms of the productivity metrics. For this conversation, I'll focus on the first part, which is around the value, because that is what primarily dictates the decision making with regards to any particular asset. This is becoming a lot more critical in current environment where we in the poll as well, we identified budget constraints as one of the key things which is being highlighted as the concern from the enterprises, and I'm sure service providers facing some of the profitability crunch, that would be one of their priorities to address as well. I also understand there was a question as a precursor to the webinar that we are hosting around understanding how we can identify operational inefficiencies and underperforming assets to which are really curbing the performance. So how can we just go ahead and reallocate resources to cover our financial losses? So for that, what we did was with the help of this toolkit, we identified, okay, this is the value for sure. And then on the next page, as we think about the framework in action, we understood that the alignment or the investments alignment with the service provider or the enterprise with the current investments that they have, how much is the investment, net new investment that's required? So is asset investment required really prohibitive, or it is feasible in the current context of operations? That's where across value on the y-axis and the investments required on the x, we had this 2 by 2 kind of a construct, where in the extreme right or the top right, segment represents the areas of the tools that you should certainly be going ahead and investing into, which are really the strategic growth priorities and opportunities for you. And when I say you, I refer both enterprises and service provider in the context of operations that they would be going ahead with. So from an enterprise vantage point, probably it is for internal efficiencies or even the client value or the stakeholder interactions that they would be doing, and similar for the service providers. So that basically gives you an edge in the market or helps you stand differentiated with limited set of investments. Those kind of products would really be the top right corner. Second would be a high potential, high investment kind of a region where you are talking about mature products, or really where you have created the brand altogether and has a broader scope or coverage, and it continues to churn revenue for you. It's important from a market positioning perspective and the established client relationships as well. And you need to ensure they are getting that sustained investments, because technically speaking, we are competing with some of the tech vendors in the ecosystem, which really creates a problem for us in terms of understanding where and what should be the roadmap of this particular product, because we need to continuously evolve so that we remain consistent and competent in the market. The bottom two, and specifically the weight part, which is the low potential investment kind of a category, that's where we believe that the providers can really take a wait and watch kind of an approach, monitor these assets, and are they aligning to significant market conditions or technological shifts? Then potentially we can go ahead and invest significantly on these assets to have a GTM around it as well. The deprioritize and retire category would be the resource strain, which is what potentially the question was. But to identify those resource strain categories, we need to continuously monitor some of these aspects, because for every product manager or every team who is closely involved to that particular product, that becomes one of the great products or go-to products in any or every market conditions. But when we think about the CIO organization, they would only have those many dollars to spend. So how do they categorize and invest, channelize those investments becomes critical. And that's where this framework would certainly help on understanding the inputs, the output, and the overall alignment with the strategy. So this is where it has helped one of the CIO organizations that we worked with, and they have been continuously using it for making any and every decisions going forward. Jugal, this was the last product, I believe, which we had to talk about, and a chance for us to summarize.
Yeah, so moving ahead, if you just go on, and we discuss some of this, but in general, what we have seen is that value articulation has become a big challenge for service providers, specifically what they want to achieve. And both sides, enterprises and clients, are not able to convey what they want. Cost reduction has been around forever, but then value has to be more than that. So both sides are struggling, but some of these assets help defining these value upfront. And by the way, it will keep changing. So it's not that you just define it today and it's the same for the next 3 years or 5 years. As the journey progresses, things change, and these assets are going to help providers as well as enterprises in that journey. And then how do these link the initiatives enterprises are taking? There is technology angle to it that we talked about. There's of course a talent angle to it, and then process angle to it. But then how these assets bring all of these things together, and enterprises are investing a lot of money in technology, talent, and process. But how do they bind all of these together to create the value that the enterprises seek from their service partners? And lastly is around create differentiation for service providers as well. The point I made earlier, many service providers do not believe they have the right to play in some of these areas. Their brand is weak in these areas, or they just don't invest because they consider this is not their business. And I think going forward, we are going to see that these assets are going to become very critical, which will differentiate a thought leadership provider, a provider who can actually stress test client thinking versus being an order taker. So in addition to being a thought leader, it will help define and clearly articulate the value for an engagement. And that value definition to point one as well is absolutely critical, specifically in this time of challenges that the industry is seeing, where every dollar has to be well spent. So our recommendation to specifically to our provider side of clients is go deep into some of these assets. If you need, come back to us and we can have a conversation. But start building these assets, or use some of the third parties to build these assets to drive that kind of a differentiation, to drive your to put your stake in the ground that yes, I'm a specialized player, but it doesn't matter. I have a very good set of assets in this, and some of these things are going to work out, hopefully. Um, so Alicia, I think uh, this is where I pass it to you.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Yugal. So, before we move ahead and take some of the questions that we have received, either as, live in the webinar or before during the registration, one quick, note to everyone who's attending. You can download a complimentary access to a report that we have published, which aligns with the key theme that we've talked about, enterprise guide for product and platform aligned operating model transformation. This is really based upon the same product that Parul was talking about. This is just one of the reports in case anybody is interested in in accessing any other report or in having a deeper conversation with us on any of these assets that we talked about, or broader areas, potential assets in any of the other areas. We are happy to have a conversation. So feel free to reach out after the webinar to any one of us. Now, very quickly, we have a few minutes left. I think there were some very interesting questions that were asked. And Parul, I'll ask this question to you. Very pertinent question. How can service providers tailor these assets? Some of these assets that we talked about, the Everest Group's data-backed diagnostic approach to demonstrate immediate ROI, particularly in situations which are high scrutiny, budget constrained enterprise environment?
That's a very valid and great question. So I think this is one of the main concerns that we try to alleviate through some of these toolkits, right? So if you remember the representation that I showed of the outcome from one of the toolkits, right? The product maturity toolkit. In that, in the 2x2, you clearly see that the client or the enterprise who is taking the assessment is mapped on capability versus outcomes, right? And it is also compared to some of the other enterprises in the same industry or overall, right? So once you take this assessment in the beginning of the engagement, you clearly map out that, okay, in the beginning of the engagement, the client lies, say, in the basic category. And as you go ahead in your engagement and say in the next month or in the next quarter, when you take the same assessment, you can clearly map out that there is a progress when it comes to the outcomes and also in the maturity in the capability part. So say in the next quarter, when the enterprise takes the assessment, and you can clearly show that they have moved from basic to a typical or an advanced level, that's a very clear and tangible proof that these are the capabilities that got matured and these are the outcomes that got improved, and that's why the enterprise moved from, say, a best a basic to a typical level. So that's how you can clearly show that there is a tangible improvement and a tangible ROI that you could actually help the enterprise to achieve. So I hope this answers the question around achieving the ROI and showing it through these toolkits.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Yugal, I think this was another very interesting question we got. At what stage do some of these strategic assets become most effective? Well, we have talked, of course, everywhere in the life cycle they are useful. Is there any stage where you believe it will be most effective to use an asset-led engagement approach?
I think where we have seen it work the most effectively is at the beginning, where the value realization framework is being built, where you are talking to the client, you are engaging with the client teams very deeply, that, okay, this is how the engagement is going to pan out, and this is how the value streams and definitions are going to evolve as we go forward. So these things are very critical there. But at the same time, the clients do ask that they do not want this exercise to be one and done. And they want the service providers to be held accountable. Okay, you promised me this thing when you were doing your pre-sale. Now you have got the engagement. You should not forget it. Let show me how you are delivering what you committed. And that's also the asset play a very important part. But in general, if the engagement starts well with these assets, we have seen the journey is generally smoother.
Absolutely, that's right. I think the sooner you can bring in some of these assets to establish your thought leadership, to establish the value of what you're bringing to the table, it also elevates your own positioning in the minds of the enterprise clients. It definitely adds a lot of weight to what you're saying. I think the other very interesting thing that we heard, or very interesting question we got, was how do providers balance the need for scalable, repeatable diagnostics with the demand for deeply customized client engagement? Now, I think that is is a bit of an art and a science. There is no clear answer to it because it really depends upon the enterprise context. It depends upon the kind of problem you're trying to solve. While bringing in some of this asset can give a lot of method to the madness to begin with, but ultimately you cannot let go of that customization eventually that is needed for an enterprise to be able to solve their client specific problem, their enterprise specific problem. So it's very important to have a good balance of how much industrialization you do versus how much customization you do. The industrialization is possibly most required right in the beginning to be able to accelerate your way through the engagement and be able to come up amongst the top service providers that enterprises want to talk to and see as credible partners. But eventually, problem solving, the assets will take you to a certain level where it gives you direction, it gives you a way forward, and then it needs to be further distilled to an enterprise context of, hey, now for you, out of these 5 things that the tool suggests, we believe this is how we need to prioritize. These are the top 3 things that you should focus on first, based upon your objectives, your vision, and what we've seen you struggle with in the past or as part of the current engagement. So I think it's a bit of both, a good balance of both. So I think with that, we'll close the Q&A. But as I said, we are happy to engage with anyone in case there are further questions, in case there's an interest in getting a demo of some of these assets that we have built. We'll be happy to do that. So feel free to reach out to any one of us. And thank you everybody for joining.